Hello, everybody. Nice to see people. Unfortunately, just online. Hi,
well,
Stefan. Hi, Otkar.
Hi.
Come on.
We are many here.
Oh, okay. Oh, is this Myrtle in the background?
Yes.
Oh, Seil Myrtlin.
Hello, Natascha.
Oh, wow. Oh, goodness. That's a cinema.
Hi,
Hi, Gudrun.
Hi.
well, shall we begin? Welcome to our lunchtime
Hi,
seminars. And we're very happy to welcome Natascha Mehler, who many of you know already, of course. I'll give you a very brief introduction and then I'll pass you over. So Natascha currently is a professor in archaeology at the University of Tübingen in Germany. And as you know, she's been working a lot on the Hanse in the north throughout her career. She, of course, knows Iceland well, been coming here for more than 2 decades and was living and working here in the early 2000s. And after moving back to Germany, of course, she's had a series of various positions at places like the University of Vienna and the Bremen Museum. But now she's established at Tübingen, and she's going to talk today about her long-running research on the Hanse, and we're all excited to hear more about that. So I'll pass you over to Natascha, and then after the talk, we'll have some questions. Natascha, over to you.
Thank you, Gavin. I'm so happy to see everybody online. I would rather chat to everybody of you for half an hour before I start, but probably that's not possible. So I better share my screen with you. Here it is. And I get my pointer. Okay. So as you can see today, I'm going to speak about the past years or decades work that I've been doing with a lot of other people in Iceland, Shetland, and the Faroes on what I call the Hanseatic League, but that's a bit of a problematic term, and I will explain that a bit later. Before I start, I would like to, if I can make the slide. I would like to first point out that this is what I'm talking about is not, of course, my work only. It's the work and the results of a lot of people and of 2 projects which have been going on for a while. The first one is named Between the North Sea and the Norwegian Sea, Interdisciplinary Studies of the Hanse, which was funded by the Leibniz Association. And the team in that project you can see on the left picture, and that project is over, and last October we started a new project called Looking In From the Edge, abbreviated LIFTE, the impact of international commercialization Northwest Europe's peripheral communities, and so on and so on. And when we got the grant funded, we decided that this project title is far too long and complicated, and we regret it deeply. But well, we continue using the acronym LIFTE. And this project is funded by the German Research Foundation and the British AHRC. So it's a cooperation with us Germans and the Orcadians mostly, and you see the Orcadian team in the image on the left side. So it's all what I'm telling today is basically the work of all of us, and more people like Mark Gardiner and whom you know. Before I start going, I better explain to you a little bit about the Hanseatic League. You probably know that this is an association of Low German merchants and the towns in which they were burghers. And most of the towns, all the towns are marked on this map. The term Hansa means band or community, and the term is known since the 12th century. And it also means the legal right to carry out communal commercial enterprise. And the Hanse comes into being in the mid-12th century, and it goes on for a couple of centuries, and then it's really weak in the 15th, 16th century, and it comes to an end during the 30 Years' War. And the Hanse research is, of course, a field of medieval or economic history, and it has focused largely on the main or core Hanse area, which is stretching basically from Lübeck to Novgorod, so this Baltic area that has been the main research area of Hanse history. What we focused in this project is the Hanseatic Enterprise in the North Atlantic. And this trade was predominantly based on merchants from the cities of Bremen and Hamburg, and also from Lübeck, but mostly it was Bremen and Hamburg merchants. And it started in the 15th century when the Hanseatic League as an association was already weak, and it had lost its, most of its power. And Hamburgers and Bremers, they went to Iceland and Shetland and the Faroes on their own. This was not in consent with the League itself. They somehow outwent the Lübeckers and went on their own to the North Atlantic islands in search of profit. We have the first written records for a ship in Orkney and Shetland in 1416, and then in 1419 in Iceland. This is at a time when the Norwegian kings had a ban on trade. You probably know the ban, that it was forbidden to trade further north than Bergen, including the Scotlands, the tributary lands. And so it was in the 15th century, it was forbidden for the ships to sail to Iceland, but they did so nonetheless. And then Iceland remained firmly in Bremen and Hamburger hands until roughly 1602 or 1620, when the Danish trade monopoly came into being. And in Shetland, it went on even longer until 1700. And in the Faroes also, with it went on until the establishment of the Danish trade monopoly. Of course, they went with ships, but we know very little about the vessels they used. Philip Grassel, a colleague, estimated the ship routes down here based on written records. So they ships large, or as much as they could, they went, of course, along the coast, and then had to cross the North Atlantic at some point. And of course, as you know, Orkney and Shetland and Faroe are somehow on stepping stones towards Iceland. And as we will see, many traders who came to Iceland also did business in Shetland. The ships, they ranged in size from about 60 to 80 lust, what it's called in the sources. 1 lust refers to 2 tons. We know not a single proper shipwreck from this period in the North Atlantic waters. Well, maybe not, maybe in Shetland we have one, but that's another story. But we have a lot of ship types mentioned in the written sources, like Holk or Cog or Craffel or Bollich and so on. Compared to the ships used by other Hanseatic merchants of Hamburg and Lübeck and so on, they were relatively small in size. So it's probably the case that it's B-class merchants who went to Iceland, and the first class, the higher level merchants went to the Baltic. We may have fragments of a shipwreck, but we will never be sure. Kevin Martin helped us look at that one. It's remains of a ship which were found in 1998 near Búðir on Snæfellsnes Peninsula by Björn Stefansson, who then recovered these pieces here and brought them to the National Museum. Unfortunately, none of these pieces were suitable for dendrodating, so we don't know how old it is, but the recovered timbers give the impression of an old carvel-built ship. So at least that would somehow fit. Búðir was an important trading site for at least 200 years. It was visited by Bremen merchants in the late 16th century, and they called it Bodenstede. We know about 11 ships that are reported to have been lost at Búðir. And one of these 7 ships are from Bremen. It belonged to the merchant Vasmer Barke and sank there in 1587. But there were, of course, other ships later, Danish vessels and so on, who sank there. So this may well be the ship of Vasmer Barke, but we can't be sure. And this is a map of Bodenstede and Stappe. You better know it as Arnastapi, from the State Archive of Bremen. And it was about this map was part of a dispute for merchants who claimed to have the right to trade in Arnastapi or Búðir, and that's why we have this map preserved. So what did the Germans come for in Iceland? This is very well illustrated on this beautiful map that you all know, the Carta Marina by Olaus Magnus, Swedish bishop from 1539. And you can see it here. It's also in the coat of arms of Iceland. It's the stockfish. It's sulfur, which is here on this map, labeled here, sulfur, pile of stockfish, and 4 falcons, hunting falcons, gear falcons. Olaus Magnus made this map during his stay in Gdansk in Poland, today Poland, and he was in close contact with the Hanse merchants in Gdansk, so he was probably very well informed when he produced this map. So how was the trade organized in Iceland and Shetland and the Faroes? We know of about 23 German trading stations from written sources, from place names, and from maps. The trading season was generally only the summer. It was forbidden for the German merchants to stay over winter. That was forbidden by the Danish king. The ships usually arrived in April and stayed until late August or September. So no winter stays were allowed. A ship that wanted to go to Iceland needed to have a license by the Danish king, which were issued from 1563 onwards. And without license, you were not allowed to travel to Iceland. So this was the way of the Danish king to try to regulate the foreign trade with Iceland. But thanks to this license system, we have a lot of written sources preserved, and they inform us about how trade was organized. As you see, most of the sites are on the west coast of Iceland, and that's of course of the fishing grounds here in this area. For the Central European audience here, it's probably important to mention that since Iceland didn't operate on a coin system, the payment was done basically in debts or in exchange. So for example, if farmer Gavin produces a pile of stockfish and he needs a barrel of beer, he goes to a trading site, for example, Hafnarfjörður, and tells the merchant, Jon, whatever, to give him a barrel of beer, and he then agrees with the merchant that he will pay so and so amount of fish, but then he will only pay the fish the year after. So this debt system was somehow based on trust, and it ensured the Icelanders that the German merchants came back the next year if they wanted to have their money back. So somehow it was also probably an unintended way of keeping the business going or keeping the provisioning of the island going. From the written sources, it was a bit complicated to go for the right place names, because the place names very often are corrupted or sound German. Like this one here, Kummerwaage in the German sources, Middle Low German, that's Kumparavågur on the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, or Bodenstede, that's Búðir, as I said, Sunte Magnus Island, that's in Shetland, that's Papastaur. So you need a bit time to figure out what place is what. And the place name Ostfjord, It's of course the fjord in the east. It's Berufjörður, and it refers to, very often these places refer to the whole fjord, and then you need to find out what place exactly in the particular fjord they went to, or what they meant. I'll come back to that in a minute. So how did this trading station look like? That's not an easy question to answer. We have this image here from the late 17th century from the station at Grundarfjörður, which was at that time a Danish one, but it was a German station before. And they probably were very similar in the German time. A couple of buildings, maybe with an earthen fence around, and a harbor site then, of course. We tried to map as much German trading sites as possible in the last years or decades. One example is the site of Kumparavågur and Snæfellsnes Peninsula. The place name refers to this bay. And on this bay, you have the headland with the Kaupstaðr, with a merchant's place. And you see a couple of ruins here. And on the opposite of the bay is a tidal island called Londay, which is only accessible or connected by the land on low tide. And you can see here two building remains as well. And this here is a reconstruction that we did of the site in Kumparavågur. So just a couple of houses, and probably built in the Icelandic way with the turf walls and timber roof. This is a crazy looking graph produced by my colleague Bart Holtermann, who was the historian in our team. And he did a fantastic job in basically looking at every single document in the German and Danish and Icelandic archives that are about the trade with the Germans in that period. And this is a graph that shows you every Icelandic harbor. I have a close-up in a minute, and it's a timeline. And for each harbor, it gives you the license holder and the name of the merchants who had the right to come here. Let me zoom in a bit so that you don't have to look too close into your computer. So for example, in the case of Búðir, which I mentioned before, yellow means Bremen. And I think here it started with 1560. It was first in the hands of Bremen merchants, then it changed to a Schleswig-Holstein merchant, Birgit Trolle, then again was frequented by Bremen people. And in case we have the names, you can see them here. This map you can download on the internet. I will send you the link at the end of this presentation. So we know pretty well who visited which site in what period and what long period. And you can also see that how complicated it must have been with people from different cities coming. And because of course they were all business rivals. The Bremen merchants didn't go along well with the Hamburg merchants. Here you have, all the sites on the Snæfellsnes Peninsula. So it was sometimes, one side was in the hands of Bremen merchants and the other one in the hands of Hamburg merchants. And the reason why we have their documents is because they were constantly quarreling about who had the right to visit what site and which site not, and so on. This is another nice example of what the written sources tell us. It's a debt register of the Bremen merchants, brothers Kort and Klaus Monichhusen, 1557 to 1558. So this is how they did their records. As I said, this business was based on debts, and Klaus and Kort neatly marked in this debt register the names of the clients and what they gave certain farmer and what the farmer then owed them to be paid the next year. And this is for the site of Kumparavågur that I just mentioned. And you can see on this map a cross for every farm or farmer that visited Kumbharavågur. So as you can see, it's a rather large area. It's 50 kilometers or more that people traveled to do business with the Monichhusen brothers. And they brought, for example, it's written in this register, linen and canvas, iron, kettles, horseshoes, swords, axes, and so on. Hooks, knives and pots, a lot of wooden material, also building material for ships, interestingly. Leather goods such as hats and shoes and trousers and so on. And then of course, foodstuffs like flour and beer. They're trying to find more details about the archaeological remains of the German trading stations in Iceland is rather complicated, as most of you in Iceland know, and who followed us over the past years. Most remains are either buried under modern buildings, like for example in Hafnarfjörður, where it's no chance of finding any Hanseatic remains, but Hafnarfjörður was the main port, especially for the Hamburg merchants. And then when the Germans left in the early 17th century, the trading stations were taken over by the Danes, who used them, and buildings were continuously used. So that also not helped, with us with the information about the archaeological remains. And then the third factor that doesn't really help us is the fact that those stations which are not buried under modern monuments are all protected sites, and by law we are not allowed to excavate them or even look at them. We tried to get excavation permission for the site of Kumbharavågur, because we picked that site because of its excellent preservation and the very good written sources and so on, but we didn't get permission to excavate. So we will never be really in the situation to learn more about these trading sites, because they are really different also in archaeology or from the remains that we see on the ground. So we can't really do anything about that, unfortunately. But we did do a bit of work on the site of Georadar in the east of Iceland. All the Icelanders in this audience and somebody others as well would know the site well. It was a site excavated by Guðmundur Ólafsson and others in the late 1970s and early 1980s. And it's just in the said fjord, Berufjörður, that I mentioned, which the Germans called Ostfjord. And we wanted to go back to Georadar because my suspicion was that it's also a site which was used by the German merchants. And the earlier work has just focused on the earlier periods of the site. So we looked at all the finds material again and went back to the site and did a digital terrain model, as you can see here. In red here are the trenches that Guðmundur and his colleagues dug 40 years ago. And in yellow, this is an area where we conducted a Georadar survey to learn more about the site. A bit of basics about the site for those who don't know it. It's established probably in the 12th century at the latest. And as we think now, it lasted around 1600, shortly before 1600. It was a place of supra-regional importance, being the main port of entry in Berufjörður during the medieval period. In the 16th century, however, Bremen and Hamburg merchants established Djúpivogur and Fyluvågur, as you can see here on the map, at the entrance of the fjord around 1570. And then both gradually superseded Georadar, so that shortly before 1600, trade was no longer conducted there. Bart Holtermann also looked at the written sources about Berufjörður or Ostfjord in the German archives. And it turns out that Bremen merchants referred to this harbor Ostfjord, that they claim to have been using since around 1500. They were sailing to Ostfjord with 2 ships annually, as apparently the region could not be covered with 1 ship alone. Only in the late 16th century were the harbors more precisely indicated in the documents in the wake of conflicts with Hamburg merchants. For example, one Daniel Ehlers from Hamburg managed to acquire a license for the harbor, Ostfjord, but this led to protests from merchants from Bremen, who claimed that this was the same harbor as they called Ostfjord, and the Hamburgers called it Berufjord. So Ehlers countered that the fjord was called Berufjord by the Icelanders, and that a fjord named Ostfjord did not exist in Iceland. So these negotiations went on for 2 years, and then the Danish administration in Copenhagen finally concluded that it was impossible to decide who was right, and confirmed the use of the harbor to both parties. In the late 16th century, Hamburg merchants received licenses for the harbor Berufjord and Djúpivogur, whereas Bremen merchants received a license for Ostfjord with the loading site Fulivogur. So that's a bit of confusion here. So in short, Ostfjord probably refers to 3 sites, but not all used at the same time, namely Gautavik, Djúpivogur, and Fulivogur. On the left side, you see a combined depth slices from the Georadar, ranging from 10 centimeters to 119 centimeters. And on the right side here, that's the interpretation of what you can see in this Georadar. This is here the area that has been surveyed and excavated by Guðmundur. That's Guðmundur's Trench, still very well visible. Here you see a couple of ruins. We found another large ruin or ruins. This blue stuff here is probably from the river. And interestingly, we also found here something round, a very strange structure. And those of you who know Gautavik probably will immediately think of this structure, which was excavated here in 1979 by Guðmundur. This very still enigmatic structure for Icelandic circumstances, a brick structure, which hasn't really been interpreted so that everybody's happy with it. Interpretations range from a corn drying kiln, then also maybe a substruction for refining sulfur, or even to make fish or train oil. But so we might have here another one of these strange round things. So we of course would have loved to go back to Gautavik and extend Guðmundur's Trench and find out more, especially about the function of these round structures, but that's not possible. The bar here on the bottom is just from this graph, from the previous graph I showed you. It shows you the name of the people who had a license for Ostfjord at a certain time. Going back to the purpose or the function of this round structure, it's probably worth noting that a document from 1591 tells of a Joachim Warnecke who bought train oil and fish in what it's called all places in the bays belonging to Bernforde. So whether this was purchased in Gautavik or Fulivogur or Djúpivogur, the document doesn't reveal, but it shows at least that train oil was produced at several sites in Berufjord at that time. We tentatively suggested even a fourth purpose of this strange thing. Maybe these are the remains of a baking oven. Of course, Icelanders did not bake their bread with the help of baking ovens of that type. But this type construction is well known from Lübeck and other German cities. And German merchants and sailors may well have wanted bread, since according to written sources, the Icelandic diet did not appeal to them. Hamburg merchants who traded in Hrútafjörður, for example, in the northwest of Iceland, they complain in a document that the crews had to eat what they say unnatural food because his people could not get bread. So maybe, who knows, this is something for baking bread. Ragnar Edvardsson also then did a couple of line dives in the bay of, or in the harbor, potential harbor area of Gautavik. Unfortunately, there were no ship remains and nothing to be found because the place is heavily silted up. But at least we tried and gave our best and looked, and yeah, unfortunately, as I said, nothing to be found. Back in the old excavations, I think 300 or 400 fragments of pottery were found, and we did a random test. I picked 15 pottery sherds of redware, lead glazed redwares of this type here for an ICP-MA analysis. So chemical analysis where you basically can establish the origin more or less precisely in case you have enough reference material, and we got enough reference material from Hanseatic cities, of course, to test. And as you can see here, these are the samples, the 15 sherds. And this is the result where they are from. 2 of them are from the area somewhere between Lübeck and Kiel, 1 from the Netherlands in the center or northeast, and the others are from the Bremen or Bremen area. So this was a result that made us pretty much happy, because it somehow confirms that this 16th century material from Gautavik does indeed link the site to German activities. We also, because I said that most or all sites are protected monuments now and basically inaccessible, but this one site is not protected because I guess nobody really knew about it. It's just on the opposite side of Kumpavågur, again on the Snæfellsnes Peninsula. It's called Londay. It's this tidal island that I showed you on the map. It's 2 large building remains. And oh yeah, here it's a map again. So we are on this tidal island here. And this is just a general orientation. The sites around Stykkishólmur on the northern side of the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, which were frequented by German merchants in the 16th century. Stykkishólmur, Nesvogur, Kumpavågur, and Londay. Londay is only twice, I think, mentioned in sources from Bremen and Oldenburg in the late 16th century. For example, one Carsten Backe from Bremen acquired a license for Londay in 1593. This is a bit peculiar because here then is, on this side is a Bremen merchant, on the opposite side are the Monikusen brothers from Bremen as well. So we don't really know why, one bay is flanked by 2 different merchant companies, basically. Sorry, my son is interrupting me. Lilia and some good people from the FSI did a test trench for us through one of the buildings. So you can see here an aerial photograph of this building, and they did a trench through it, and they somehow hit the right place because they, as you can see here, they hit one of the outer walls. Here's a close-up. They even hit the fireplace, which was very, very good. And in this trench, they also recovered about 16 redware fragments from 1 pot alone. And we also conducted the ICP-MS analysis on these sherds. And they are matching with our Bremen sherds. So they are also made in Bremen. And that's, of course, a super interesting result. So we really got the jackpot here. So we can be more or less sure that this is the Bremen site from Londay, which is not protected yet. So hopefully we can continued to work there at one time. Take a look. Half an hour. So I try to speed up a bit. The projects that we did are not only on Iceland alone, but also, of course, in Shetland and the Faroes. Here you see a map on the Shetland Islands, and all dots are trading stations frequented by the German merchants at the same time. In the first half of the 16th century, Shetland trade is an important part of Bremen's economy. In 1 year, for example, 40,000 pounds of fish come from Shetland to Bremen, whereas in the same year, about 80,000 pounds of fish come from Iceland. So here you see the relationship a bit. In 1563, Ola Sinclair, the Chamberlain of Shetland, names 8 main ports that were frequented by the German merchants. And you see here the transcript of the document. Again, we have somehow corrupted forms. Schalewage, that's Galloway, Brusund, that's Bressay, and so on. That's the St. Magnus Island, that's this site here. Where's my mouse? Since, of course, Shetland was not part of the Kingdom of Denmark-Norway at the time, the license system that was active in Iceland was not the case, wasn't there in Shetland. So the merchants didn't have to apply for licenses all the time, so they were more free to trade here, and they were also allowed to stay over winter. That's why we have merchants here, which we can follow for decades, who have lived here permanently. So probably the impact on the local society was more than in Iceland. We have a nice description by George Buchanan from 1582. The way of life of the Shetlanders is the same as of the Orcadians, except that it is a little harsher in terms of domestic supplies. They dress in German fashion, but for their abilities, not indecorously. They use measures, numbers, and weights according to the German custom, and German also, or almost Old Gothic, is their speech. Some have settled here permanently, like Sigebert Detken, that's his name, who is buried in the church at Lunavik on Unst, that's his grave slab. And he has written that Sigebert Detken, interestingly, this is an inscription in Middle Low German, so only probably readable to the Germans in Shetland. He's named as a burgher and merchant of Bremen, who did his business in Shetland for 52 years and died in 1573. But investigating German trading sites in Shetland is equally difficult. Mostly the same circumstances, except for the protected monument status, which is not the case in Shetland. We tried our luck in a site called Gunnister on the west coast of mainland. It's a very pretty bay, as you can see, and the site is here in a little promontory, but it was already heavily eroded by the sea when we came. So this is, our small trench, which we could place here on this little spit of land, and we only found these 2 remaining walls, which we think are the remains of the booth of a certain Simon Hagerskale, merchant of Hamburg, who came here to trade in 1582. The place still goes by the place name Hagrisbød, so you can see the corrupted name of Simon Hagerskale here. His right to trade here was revoked in 1603 because he was said to have neglected his duty to sail to Gunnister regularly. And then he moved his business to the small island of Papastaur. So how about Orkney? We know that they went to Shetland, but we know nothing about German trade with the Orkney Islands. And that's the task of our project that started in October. So we have, 2 archipelagos which are culturally very closely connected, of course. But when it comes to the German trade, it seems to be completely different settings. The German trade is generally regarded as directed to Shetland only. Orkney is more fertile than Shetland with a larger area of arable land. And is considered to have more grain-based economy orientated towards trade with Shetland, Scotland, and maybe also with Norway. How far this distinction holds true, we will examine in this project. And we started, the documents or the archives in Orkney aren't really have not really been accessible so far, and so you can't really look for documents and anything with Bremen and Hamburg. So this is a first step that we're doing now. And sorry, a lot of documents are currently transcribed by the help of one archivist and a group of volunteers. But already now the archival evidence hints at that there were Orkney merchant lords or lairds. They were partaking in the German trade networks via the German merchants in Shetland. So there seems to be somehow a kind of indirect trade. We also do, in the summer, we will hopefully do, when we are free to travel, a couple of trenches in Shetland. And we have invited volunteers to help us dig in Shetland, in Gunnistar and in Scalloway. And to our great surprise, this was very successful. In one day, we had 120 registrations, so far too many. So we have to find out what we do with all these volunteers on 3 or 4 sites. But at least it shows us that people are interested in what we're doing. And we will also go through the archaeological remains from previous excavations, because like in the case of Shetland and Iceland, the material culture is full of stuff from the Hanseatic world, so to say. As you can see here, a lot of Rhenish stonewares, the usual redware, and so on and so on. So that's what we will do soon. And a quick look at the Faroes. This is a different situation again. It's neither a license system here like in Iceland, nor is it a free business here like in Shetland. It's based on a trade monopoly with the city of Hamburg in the 16th century. It goes through the names of a couple of people, but most notably one Thomas Koppen. It's his stone off with the coat of arms from his house in Stavenpforte in Hamburg from 1456. You see Thomas Koppen here as in the Renaissance, this kind of this depiction. And Thomas Koppen operated a trading station in Tórshavn, the present capital, of course. And maybe there was another site on the island of Suðuroy in the south. In Tórshavn, of course, there's little chance to do anything on the peninsula of Tinganes. It's all built up by modern buildings. But Sumirj Arjay and his colleagues did a couple of investigations, and they are pretty sure that the merchant house has been here on this area, the merchant house of Thomas Koppen. And during some excavations, this typical Rhenish stoneware showed up. Because we couldn't really do anything into Tórshavn, we went to the island of Suðuroy. Because there seems to be another site, which Sumirj pointed out to us. In 1952, his predecessor, Sverre Dahl, made a trench here and recorded the remains of a building, which he drew here. And you see the material culture that he found. And the assumption is that this is a trading outpost. We have no written sources at all about this place, but since Tórshavn is far away from the island of Suðuroy, we're pretty sure that some kind of provisioning base was needed in this faraway island as well. This is a touchstone, like merchants used to have in their pockets to assess the value of precious metals. We have a typical Veda bowl with a number 16, so it's probably 1620 or so, and a brick and a whetstone. So we went back a couple of years ago to reopen this excavation and enlarge the trench. So we basically went back here and opened this part, and in this area a lot of rubble and a stone paved floor turned out to came up, and this wall as well. So we haven't really, finished our post-excavation report, but we're pretty sure that this is a much larger station than we initially thought, with a couple of more buildings or rooms. And the dating, we found a couple of potsherds from the 16th century. So we think at present that this is like in Iceland, it's a place which was maybe established by the Germans. And then when they were gone, it was taken over by whoever came after, Danes or the Dutch. And I want to thank Sumirj, who you all know, who passed away sadly a couple of weeks ago. He did the best to entertain us and keep us happy, and was a great help to us. And we had planned to go back to the Pharaohs in March or April, and it was a great shock to hear that he isn't there anymore. So he will be deeply missed by all of us. I better jump over this now and stop it here, because it's I have been talking for far too long. But before I close, please let me show you a bit how you can, download a couple of stuff or look at stuff. First, it's most important, it's our online database of all the documents that relate to the German trade with the North Atlantic Islands. It's called Hansdoc. You find it online, I'm sure, and it holds all the records from Iceland, Copenhagen, Edinburgh, Orkney, and so on, and it will continuously be fed. So you have, you can look for places and people and commodities and vessels and so on. And in most cases, you have the transcripts. In some cases, you also have the facsimiles there. So we hope that a lot of people make use of this, but of course it's a bit complicated because the sources are in Middle Low German, they are in Shetland dialect, they are in Danish, they are in Icelandic, so it's a mix of languages, of course. I also want to point out our blog. It's called Fish and Ships, where we continuously try to post interesting stuff, which is too interesting not to share, but will probably be lost in all the information. But most important, I think, is the PhD thesis of Bart Holtermann, which is called The Fishlands. It just came out this year. I think a couple of books have made it to Iceland already. It's open access, downloadable on the website of De Gruyter, including this crazy looking graph that I showed you with all the harbors and licenses. So you can download it as supplementary material. So feel free to do that. And lastly, it's a interdisciplinary workshop we had with historians, archaeologists, linguists, and so on. And that's also on the web, free to download. I would be glad if you would look at it. That's all for it. Happy to hear your questions.
Thank you very much, Natascha.